Hey there, listener. Welcome to the Deep Share podcast. I'm your host, Andy Rouse, and for the last couple of decades, I've slowly been opening my eyes to a very different world than the one I grew up hearing about. And the more conversations I have with interesting people, the more mystifying this world becomes. So without further ado, let's get deep.
We've got science to celebrate! Demons bliss out! After what, baby? Come on!
There is rebellion in the wind. It will crush.
Everything I've said is true. It's real.
Dinosaur fossils? God put those here to test our faith.
A damn lie. I saw them with my own eye.
Did IQs just drop sharply while I was away?
We did illusions, man! None of it is true!
I'm not insane.
This is mass madness, you maniacs! In God's name, you people are the real thing! We are the illusion!
Good and stuff.
Just gonna fucking start the recording anyway.
Oh yeah.
Cold opens, like, you know, they're always better anyway.
Smoking pipe.
Yeah, man, I'm glad to have you here. I'm really glad that we connected on the Twitter space, despite it being a raging like firebomb of.
I haven't been on Twitter since I was like 16, bro.
It's probably
Honestly,
a
good for you. Like that's probably the smartest choice here.
Yeah, for real. It's a cesspool for the most part. I just
Sounds
mainly
like Reddit.
pick fights with like the UFO Twitter gang. It's pretty fun.
I've noticed that. Yeah.
I'm friends with a couple of them though that kind of have a I don't know, a less intense flag planting in specific things kind of view of it, but I don't know.
Well, cool.
But I'm sure we'll get into the. We can probably even acknowledge some crossovers between the shadiness of government involvement with psychedelics versus shady government involvement with anything called disclosure.
Yeah,
I mean,
100%.
it's fucking tomato, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But
Potato.
anyway, welcome to the Deep Share. I'm with Shane Newsome and Vincent Rado.
What's up?
And
What's up?
Vincent and I connected on Twitter. I just started following him because I started seeing him say a lot of critical things that I don't often hear in the psychedelic community. And that's immediately, it hits home for both Shane and myself. We both share a number of different perspectives on this, but like for the most part, kind of acknowledging all the shady side of everything and definitely not suggesting that like it's just strictly like old news. Oh yeah, there's some shady shit that used to happen, but now they're all on our side and now everybody's, they're going to legalize psychedelics and everything's going to be okay. It's going to just be a home run for everybody. And I just have always been really, really leery about that. As soon as any pharma, big or small, gets involved in that situation or politics or anything like that, it just immediately seems shady. And when they're suddenly changing their minds about psychedelics and wanting to allow all this to happen, it doesn't mean the psychedelics are bad at all necessarily, but there's an absolute conversation that needs to happen, So that's what we're going to probably get into tonight. But first off, Vincent, let's let our listeners get to know you a bit. What started all this and what got you into this? Oh, you're muted, man.
Sorry, my bad.
All
It
good.
happens.
No worries.
It happens.
Happens
I
all.
don't want everyone to hear the water bubbling.
Oh, we love it.
I'm okay. So yeah, that's a good question. I also just want to say hey and thanks to all the watchers and listeners out there. How did I get into this? Well, if you had asked me 10 years ago, I would have said like, I've always had a yearning for spiritual stuff and whatever. But now, and just be like, as to bounce off what you said in the intro, I mean, I kind of see it now that I got into psychedelics because our generation was conditioned to. I mean, all my, there's,
Yeah.
I'm not even trying to pretend there's anything unique about it for real. I mean, y'all know, you've seen the headlines and the TV shows and the music and stuff. And I'm not saying that from a place of resentment, but I'm just saying like, there's a lot of people our age that do drugs and stuff. And I don't really think it's anything special on my part. I think it's more a reflection of the social and the political and the financial, arguably even the religious forces at play in our society. So, it's kind of a nerdy answer, but I'll go with it.
I dig it. I dig it. I dig it. And so mainly my interest in having you on was because you have brought up a bunch of information, at least put it in my sites about like different organizations and things like that. And just can you talk about a little bit about some of that?
Yeah, for sure. So I began using all these drugs kind of on the young side. In high school, I was like 14, 15, like 16 when I started to do all this, and wound up getting in a whole bunch of trouble as a teenager. Got locked up and stuff, was mistreated by cops, all the stuff that comes along with like living in the US and doing drugs or whatever, or being any type of anything outside of playing by the rules. Anyway, I reacted to all of that by getting even more into the drugs. So even though I got in trouble for drugs at a young age, and they in a way totally wrecked my life in a certain way, all that did to me as a teenager was just like make me even more fascinated with all of this. Like why am I in trouble for this, And at first I thought that the most authentic response to that would be to like totally pursue the drug angle, get into the legalization and stuff. So I started the DC Psychedelic Society in 2017, which is like an education, harm reduction, advocacy group. We aren't quite as active now as we have been in the past, but we do still have like meetings and potlucks and stuff. But when I got that group going with the help of some really good friends, we were not the first psychedelic society. So there were actually a number of others that had started. The first one was in San Francisco. Another one popped up in Portland. There was one in New York, a couple more. And then we began our group, and now there's a society for psychedelics in like almost all the big cities, all the big towns. It's like, if the population number is above like a certain point, there's like a psychedelic club in like that city now, which is crazy because even just 10 years ago, that was not the case. Right. But I happen to be, I mean, honestly, if it wasn't me, it probably would have been someone else. I was just the dude who stood up and said, "Hey, do you guys want to do this?" And, but it turned out there was a huge interest in psychedelics in DC. There was there were a lot of people that wanted a space to talk about it, but didn't have one. And there were also tons of activists and scientists and like researchers and authors and stuff who had already been doing this. They were already out there like putting themselves on the line and promoting these drugs. And it's kind of actually like a small world if you get into that network. And like very soon I found myself collaborating and hosting events with some pretty prominent people in the movement, and I can talk about all that more later. But just to answer your question, so I mean, we were hosting events with people from MAPS. I'm sure a lot of our listeners will probably already be aware of the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. If you're listening to me because you know my name already, you already know about MAPS, so I'm just going to leave it at that. But and then I was also working, I hosted a couple events with people from the Johns Hopkins program, and hanging out with these people, like, after the events was done, just getting high, like talking, I started just hearing certain things about how the scene works. And at first it was easy for me to just kind of like tune it out. It was just one or two things here and there, but it got to a certain point where there was like a whole list of problems that I had witnessed or heard about just from being within the advocacy field for even just like a year or two. It's pretty crazy how actually like messed up a lot of this stuff is. But I began learning like where organizations like MAPS were getting their money, which was from people like the Rockefellers and the Mercers. And I just started learning all kinds of like the abuse and the harassment that happens to patients in these studies. That is, I mean, now it's getting more attention, which is great. But for years, like, well, it's just crazy because there are still people that don't talk about it.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is at least from my world, it's not talked about enough at all.
Yeah, exactly. So I acknowledge I'm in this little bubble and we're all talking about all this stuff all the time, but it does still need to enter into the larger dialogue. Like for instance, Anderson Cooper did a primetime piece on mushrooms the other night, and like I didn't even bother watching it, but I doubt that they spent much, if any, time even talking about the potential like abuse of that the therapist can do and stuff. But anyway,
no, not at all. It's probably a puff piece, I'm assuming, from Mr.
I mean, yeah. Well,
Mr. I'm not in the CIA.
Yeah, exactly. You already know. But so I started learning all these things, being upfront from the actual people in the movement, and I was just like, whoa. And it just honestly, it put me on pause. Like, I still love all these drugs, but when I kind of began to learn how the advocacy movement and the research was operating, plus I'm personally very interested in like politics and religion and history and all that kind of stuff. So I was always trying to plug this into like the bigger picture. And it just got to a point where I was like, in good conscience, I could not keep hosting a panel discussion every month about how great MDMA was, because there was just so much else going on. And it got to the point where like the events that we were doing were all like one of the last big ones that I organized before I kind of took a step back was dismantling psychedelic patriarchy, which was kind of like a continuation of an event that had been organized by Catherine McLean. And that was the stuff I wanted to be talking about. It was like a whole panel discussion all about the patriarchal abuse that happens inside of this research and this network. But it was probably our single least well-attended event that we had ever organized. And I just got really jaded. I was like, I want to talk about this stuff, but nobody wants to listen to it. And I just took a step back for a few years and got a job and like focused on myself and all this kind of stuff. But long story short, so that's kind of where I am now. So I've been spending the last few years really grappling with all of this, and I've been working on a few different books. There's one I released last July. There's one that's coming out very soon called High and Mighty, which I'm happy to talk about.
Yeah.
And I got another one coming out, but all of these books are basically me trying to share like what I've learned as an organizer with the public, because there's just so much more to it than people realize. So anyway, that was a long-winded answer. I apologize.
That was great.
No, not at all, man. That's what we wanted. That's what we needed. You know, want to understand where you're coming from. And the would you say that you found like they were getting money from like Rockefellers and stuff like that?
Yep.
Everybody gets money from Rockefellers, right? I mean, who cares? They're just really rich or something.
What I don't understand is like, why are they trying to like push psychedelics so hard? Like, I mean, it could traumatize a lot of people. It could leave a lot of people lost. And I guess that's what they want, because I don't know, from my personal experience and Andy's, from what I've gathered is, most people don't, what they said, what was it? Terrence McKenna said, once you pick up the phone, you get the answer, you hang up the phone.
I think that was Alan Watts or something,
or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, a lot of people they're in the realm, but they don't even hear the phone fucking ringing.
Yeah.
And they can keep going back all day and just party and never get a thing from it.
Oh, totally.
or even if it's not just party, even if it is like seeking the deepest
Right.
realms, right? You and I both have
yeah.
talked about, Vince, maybe you can relate to this.
Oh yeah,
This
totally.
this place that you get to where the janitors are mopping the
Trying to go
floors
back.
and they're like, "Why are you here again?
Yo,
You
straight
told
up.
yourself so many times
Yes.
you weren't
Yes.
gonna get here again."
Yeah.
It was like, whoa, what is this? And so
Yeah.
like I've learned personally, and Shane's, we've talked about it extensively, that it's like, yeah, you put down the phone, and as even Maynard James Keenan of Tool once said, it's like I love Tool, but then I have a love-hate relationship with them. But what did he say? He was like, use psychedelics as a tool, but then, spend the rest of your life trying to get back there without them, and I think that was valuable, but of course it's probably loaded too. I don't know.
Well, there's a lot there behind Tool and
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
all that
I
we
mean,
could
that
talk
was
about.
the general message I got from psychedelics, though. It's like, you already
Yeah.
fucking know what you need to know.
Right. Yeah.
Integrate and fucking,
Yeah.
put your head into
Blast
this
off.
shit.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. Choose your
So-
path, do something. And I
Yeah.
think, a lot of people, including myself, experienced a extremely long time to wake up to the message, I think, because there's no guidance really. I mean, everybody's
100%.
kind of children. It's Lord of the Flies,
Yeah. I mean, you're taking the words out of my mouth, like both of you, honestly. Like it sounds like
Yeah.
in a good way, because it sounds like we have experienced very similar things, and I just want to say for people out there who are listening, like if you are really into the tryptamines and the phenethylamines and all that kind of stuff right now, and you hear what we're saying and you're like, oh my God, these guys don't get it. These drugs are so cool. They clearly don't know what they're talking about. Like, I don't want to speak for you guys, but I also was in that perspective for a long time.
Yeah.
Like, to get to the place that you both are talking about, I mean, and that's the thing, like, these drugs are often portrayed as like, oh, you just use them like once or maybe 3 times and they'll change your life forever for the better. And that can definitely be true, but it's like drugs in general are more entropic than people realize. And what is not in the literature really yet is that people have responses to these drugs, like, for example, I mean, I was using them very recklessly, but I thought I was being super smart about it at the time.
Same.
Because I was reading all the MAPS pamphlets. I was reading the Rick Strassman books and the Terrence McKenna books. And I
all the
thought
dead
that I was,
heroes, as I say.
right. I thought I was like onto some next level shit. And I was literally just like going through bag after bag of DMT until I was incoherent and people literally didn't even understand what I was talking about.
Yeah, dude.
I thought I was like on some cool shit.
Yeah.
And people were like, what the is wrong with
You
this
might
guy?"
have
In
been,
my mind.
but like you were just like you're way vibing on a way different fucking level than this, and where it wouldn't even apply anymore. I know exactly. I've been there, and a very good friend of mine has gotten there, and like I'm with him, and then he's just like on some shit. It's like, dude, like
Yeah.
we're humans, bro. Like that's not happening.
Yeah, there's a lot of us, like I often say that, like, quote unquote enlightenment, there's too much focus on this ascension rather than grounding.
Yes.
And the psychedelics are, I hate to say, because a lot of me loves what they've done for my mind in a way, but the more I spiral back around, who fucking knows? But yeah, they're definitely an engine starter for sure. They're just the idea of changing your life forever for the better. Man, I came out of that feeling like the crazy person in a movie.
Yeah, dude.
Like, even amongst my friends who also took psychedelics, like, it just hits some of us differently. And I think it's not even the psychedelic, because drugs just show you yourself, different parts of yourself. Yeah.
No, I've told
Just
me and
rant.
Andy have talked about this a million times. I've had a solipsis since I was a little kid.
Oh geez.
And like, I kind of grew out of it mostly, but like I always kind of had that sense. And I took psychedelics and it was just like completely reaffirming for me. And it just completely disconnected me from everybody for so long. And it's been so hard to be able to ground myself, as Andy said, and actually live my human life and not constantly trying to be
Right.
in the spiritual realm or whatever you want to call it.
But totally. Yeah, I
And
think. Oh, sorry. Go on.
that was it. That was it.
Vincent,
no,
do you think there's driving forces behind that financial patriarchy or whatever that has something to do with what Shane just mentioned? Like this solipsis thing is, I mean, there's like books about it, and a lot of psychedelics are mentioned a lot of times. I don't know if you felt that way. Like
It's a
Do you
very
mind explaining-
dangerous
you made it all
point of
up.
view.
For listeners who may not be familiar with the term, do you want to give just like
Sure,
a
sure, sure.
Yeah.
Solipsis is the understanding, at least from your own perception, that you are the only thing in existence and you
Mm.
made everything else up.
Like this
Yeah,
is just your own dream.
Yeah, and it's not that you're seeing life from the other side of that dream like a lot of new age stuff is fucking filled with,
yeah.
but nothing against experiencers or near death. I love all of you and talk to them often, but shit, I lost my train of thought.
Well, no,
Yeah.
I mean, you both had a couple good points in there, and there was a question that I did catch that I will answer.
Cool.
Yeah, about the solipsis and whether that is interesting, and I would just want to say thank you to Shane for like sharing about that. I do think I mean, I'm not a psychologist, right? Like this is just us talking. Like
Right.
that general obsession with the self, it can definitely happen without the drugs, but I think especially if somebody like, for example, I started getting into this stuff when I was like a teenager.
Mhm.
And when you're a teenager, you're already grappling with very weird questions about like what is reality and stuff.
Yeah.
And like I was like adding like K-holes and like bong hits of DMT to that.
Yeah.
And it's just like
Mine was just acid and mushrooms, but
I mean, I would have preferred to have access to acid and mushrooms for real, but I was
honestly.
so eager to start doing drugs, and the ketamine and the acid and the DMT were just what I found.
Yeah.
But
Whatever I found.
which
I
is
couldn't find
also-
DMT.
Yeah, I'm assuming we all lived
DMT.
in the suburbs of some kind,
Right.
in some
So-
way or another.
And this goes to Andy's question, which is like, are there driving forces behind this phenomenon? Okay, so 100%. That's actually one of the themes of my new book, High and Mighty, which is the subtitle is How People in Power Use Drugs. Okay.
Right. I've
And
seen
then-
that you advertise it. I've been pushing it for you as much as I
thank you.
can. and
I
I
appreciate
will
all the
keep doing that.
retweets.
Can't
For
wait
real,
to read it.
Thank you. And how people in power use drugs could be interpreted a lot of different ways, but for simplicity in the book, I break it down into two ways, which is how do people in power use drugs on themselves? And then how do they use drugs on others?
Mhm.
And
Awesome,
really,
dude.
a lot of the interesting stuff is in the second part. You know, the first part is just like a bunch of rich, powerful dudes getting messed up. Like we already know that, you know, we can just turn on the
Mhm.
news and see it, like Prince Harry and stuff. Okay, cool. But what's really interesting about the relationship of the upper class, particularly in our society, but if you look back in history at any society, particularly empire-based and capitalist-based cultures, the drugs. Okay, so drugs are absolutely foundational to the history of the United States, but also our politics and just like what it even means to quote be un-American. And I use that term with great caution. I actually don't like to say America or American because they're named after a European colonist. It's like, why are we using these names for anyway? Another tangent we'll save, but it actually ties back into this because those driving forces, they actually go all the way back to Columbus, the church. Like these figures and these institutions that have been around for hundreds of years that we just associate with like whatever, like mundane reality history, they're the same ones that have been interested in this the whole time. Like, for example, the first recorded case of an indigenous person in the Western Hemisphere consuming a DMT containing plant came from somebody who had accompanied Columbus on one of his ships.
Interesting.
It goes all
That's
the way back.
ridiculous.
Isn't that crazy? His name was,
It's like a nugget for us to find and go,
Oh,
oh,
yeah.
see?
Yeah.
It's like, whoa. Columbus was a fucking prick. Like, well, he's like the guy that like came here. Like, no, dude, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So
all just there for us.
when
Gordon Wasson, man.
oh, 100%. Well, he is the modern continuation of that lineage. Did you guys? I
Yeah.
mean, you guys may already know that Wasson had a direct line to the Vatican as part of his job at J.P. Morgan.
I didn't know that nugget about his job at JP Morgan.
Okay, so did you know that his specialty was in public relations or PR?
Perfect.
So, and before he got into the mushrooms, like part of the way he had gotten on JP Morgan's good side was he had basically pitched the marketing for a huge contract that JP Morgan had with the government where they sold a bunch of defective guns to the military. And it was Wasson who pitched that sale. And they were like, "We like you, you're moving up." And he became a vice president at JP Morgan, where he specialized in public relations. And that's what he was doing when he got into the mushrooms. And people, well,
sorry, go ahead.
On the surface, it looks like, okay, whatever, that was his day job, man. But he was actually ahead and he liked the mushrooms. What people don't realize is that these things are the same thing. His public relations job at JP Morgan, where he was on the phone with the Vatican, and him publishing books about how mushrooms are a way to access God, it's not an accident. And on the surface,
and his government involvement as well, right?
Yes.
I mean, the CIA was signing his checks.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's literally the CIA declassified out there. It's open source on the internet. There's a letter from Dulles to Wasson.
Yeah, dude.
Like and for readers who are not aware, that's Alan Dulles, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency in the 50s and the 60s, while MK Ultra was going on. There's a whole lot more with Dulles that we'll save for later. But for people who like why this is relevant is that Alan Dulles was the CIA director who launched MK Ultra, and the CIA has released declassified personal correspondence between Alan Dulles and Gordon Wasson.
Right.
So when people try to say, "Oh, there's no connection there. This was just his hobby,"
they'll justify that too. There's plenty of justifiers out there, and even all to the far extent of saying, "Well, yeah, man, there's like a faction," and again, a parallel to the alien UFO thing. No, man, there's factions in the government that are on our side, and they're against the bad guys, man. It's a fucking comic book. It's an Avengers movie for them.
Yeah. Well, this goes back to ancient Egypt, and I'm happy to give the breakdown.
I'd love to hear your perspective on that because my head is stuck in ancient history most of the time, so I love this stuff.
Okay, so what you just mentioned, where it's like this has been pitched to us as something like cool, but then when you start to dig, it's like maybe this is just another project backed by the government. But on this, it's like whoa. It sounds like why would they do that? But like the whole point here is that this basic concept where the regime in power within an empire, instead of totally eradicating the counterculture or the opposition, they infiltrate it and they allow it to continue to exist. Because what rulers learned in 2000 BC, more or less, in ancient Egypt or Kemet, when some people may know that a lot of the early spiritual traditions in history were based on the sun worship.
Oh, well, yeah.
Because it's not hard to figure out why. I mean, the sun is the light that grows our food, all that, yada, yada. Yeah. So a lot of the early political structures were run on the pretense that the figure in charge of the governing body was the personal representative of the sun.
Right. Yep.
And a lot of the earliest power structures were based on that kind of an ideology. And this starts with ancient Egypt. I mean, for all I know, it could go back even further. I haven't really done my research before ancient Egypt,
I got some episodes for you, Vincent.
Yeah. But so around the second millennium BC in ancient Egypt, the government, which was based on the sun worship, they okay, so in ancient Egypt, even though the government was based on the sun, where the emperor would say, "Hey, I'm the sun. You should follow me. Like how you follow the sun, treat me that way, and you'll have good times." But there were still people who had their own belief systems, and were like, "Okay, Mr. Sun Guy, I'm over here praying to the moon or whatever, or like what have you." And so there were different what is called cults, and that's a loaded word. So
Yeah.
I say that with, I'm not trying to degrade or downplay the gravity of what these groups were in society. To call them cults in a way is belittling, but I just use that word because in the literature, that's the easiest way for people to find this history.
Well, it's
Because
also etymological too. I mean, this is
right,
where
like
these words
culture,
come
yeah,
from.
yeah,
Culture
exactly,
comes
exactly,
from the word called.
yeah,
Yeah,
right.
exactly. You
So
know,
I'm sorry I'm rambling here, but
not at
basically
all.
to bring it up to speed. So when okay, so the sun-based government in ancient Egypt, they at one point tried to eradicate all of the other cults that were not the sun-based because they wanted to get the whole population on the same page. That's easy to understand from a ruler's perspective why they would want to do that.
Mhm.
But most people don't really ever take it beyond like, okay, I can see that. And but what the rulers, they actually did that. And what happened is all the other cults had a reaction against the government. And what they realized is that the smarter thing to do for the longevity of the state is to allow the other cults to exist. And you still run the sun god, or the main belief system of the empire still exists, and you still want to get people in that. But if people get their own belief system or a counterculture of any sort, what the ruling class has learned since ancient Egypt, don't totally ban them, allow them to be part of your party, and then they'll be voting for you and paying your taxes before you know it. And okay, so this wisdom was actually passed on from the Egyptians to the Greeks, okay?
Mhm.
And then from the Greeks to the Romans. And in every time period, it takes a different form. So in ancient Egypt, it's the sun god and the pharaoh at battle with the various cults, in particular, like the Osiris cult, which is a good one to look at for people who want to
Oh,
see
yeah.
how this all connects. In the in ancient Greece, one form that this took was in the battle between the state and those who partook in the mysteries of Eleusis,
Yep.
which the psychedelic nerds will already know what that means. But for those who aren't, it was another one of these ancient spiritual cults in ancient Greece, which is widely accepted to have used a drug-based beverage to induce a spiritual experience. And a lot of the upper class in ancient Greece were in this ritual. And a lot of the drama around the history of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, it actually kind of like ties into how the Greek state responded to people who were accused of like sharing the cults with the pub. Like it gets really deep, and I'm happy to explain how each particular one ties through. In the Romans, it was the Roman Empire and the Christians, and
Right.
the Christians were the backlash against the Roman Empire. At first, the Romans tried to eradicate the Christians, but the Christians didn't go anywhere. They just kept multiplying. So the Romans figured out, let's legalize Christianity. Legalize Christianity, as in it had actually been banned. So what the whole point that I'm getting at here is that the rulers have learned, if you actually totally eradicate the opposition, it just comes back to bite you even harder. So you want to give it a type of an equilibrium where your opposition is under the belief that it actually has a chance at like winning this thing, but the whole time you are the one collecting the taxes and deciding how the revenue is spent. Now, all of that wisdom from ancient Egypt and ancient Greece and the Romans has been obsessively studied and passed on among the modern power structures in the West. And when you look at groups like the Freemasons and the CIA, I mean, they openly acknowledge their influence with this ancient period and how the empires of these cultures would handle the various problems of their day. So I'll shut up now, but
No, it's great. You just threw so much in there, man.
yeah, I mean,
Boom, Fox Saga. It goes all the way back. Everyone's
Oh,
just
Jesus.
copying the forefathers.
It fucking, that's the thing. Like, yeah, I mean, we could do a whole episode, man. Just talking about like, well, let's talk about what might have happened before Egypt as well, and
Oh, yeah.
before Kemet.
Mhm.
And
So what I want to know is
Excuse
what
me.
is their fucking motive?
oh man,
Like-
well, so that's subjective, brother. I mean, we literally don't know.
Well,
We
and it
don't, we
varies from
don't.
person to person. Okay, so like even if you look at the individual key players like inside the movement, a lot of them have different motives.
Mhm.
A lot of the key people involved are not even aware of like the true power dynamic that's driving their careers.
Mhm.
And so as to whether or not they're like down with
Useful
this, yeah, I mean, not, yeah, I mean, yeah.
idiots.
Um,
That's a term that's been going around lately.
yeah. I mean, I felt like I was a useful idiot, honestly. Like
Same.
I anyway,
Yeah, all of us have been there.
yeah. But the whole point here is that this goes back, and so if you actually read like the writings of Alan Dulles, for example, the CIA director who launched MK Ultra, or if you look at the writings of Tim Leary, the godfather of LSD and all that, they
Send your children to Tim. Yeah.
they openly profess in their own writings how much they love the politics and the religion and the history of ancient Greece and ancient Egypt and ancient Rome and Socrates. They both Dulles and Leary write about how they love Socrates. Like there's actually an interview out there with Alan Dulles where he's like, oh yes, the various forms of intelligence gathering trace back to the time of Socrates. Ha ha ha. And it's like he literally is just saying it, but
Oh yeah.
unless you actually go and do the research, and now so part of what I write in High and Mighty is I actually, I went back and I read Plato, I read Aristotle, I read The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and I actually picked out all the specific lines that are applicable to what's going on right now with drugs, which at first you would think, okay, whatever, but there's actually like so much material, it's crazy.
Mhm.
And what's wild is like, if you read The Art of War, for example, which some background here, so like back when I was a useful idiot, just like saying, hey, everybody, let's take these drugs, yeah, legalize. I mean, I wasn't explicitly saying that, but that was kind of the vibe. And I was advocating them constantly.
Mhm.
I attended a
Likewise,
conference
man.
that was held in Baltimore by a group called Students
Be
for
more. I played a lot of shows in Baltimore. man.
Yeah, there's a lot of dope music in Baltimore. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of cool people up there. I actually, I got into all this in Baltimore. Like, I got into the psychedelic advocacy by hanging out in Baltimore and going to meetings that people were already doing up there. But to get back to the question,
Sorry.
no.
I don't even remember the question, but this is all good stuff.
There were just a million different directions I was about to.
I threw him off.
No,
Talking about
you're
the
good. You're
local
good.
Spots.
Sorry, we've
bro.
been talking about Alan Dulles and the
Oh yes, okay.
influences.
The Art of War. Boom. Alan
Oh,
Dulles. Okay.
Zoo.
Thank you, my friend. At least one of us has our short-term memory together.
A
Okay.
little.
No,
Thank
no.
you for that.
Not
Yes.
Okay, so all right.
Barely.
I was at this conference in Baltimore that was hosted by a group called Students for Sensible Drug Policy. Here, actually, do y'all mind if I just take a bong here real quick? I know that sounds ridiculous, but I
Dude,
actually,
no, 100%.
No, that's
a
actually a
firm opinion.
beautiful.
So
it's a
I just want to
beautiful
say real
connection
quick,
right there.
I just made a little quip about the memory and stuff.
Mhm.
Personally, I don't think that cannabis has a fixed effect on our memory.
Dude, I
actually
don't
feel,
either, bro.
I feel like my memory is actually enhanced the higher that I am because the cannabis and terpenes open up. It's some whole shit. Anyway,
Oh yeah, the cannabinoid system
Yeah.
in us. I did a whole episode. Shane and I did an episode with a man, a doctor.
Cannabis doctor, bro.
Yeah, man, it was really
man.
cool.
Oh, how am I blanking on his name, bro?
Yeah, me too. But
He's
see, there's
so
my
cool.
long-term memory or midterm memory is like I like to call it. Like, I can ask my wife what she had for breakfast last Monday, and she's going to be able to tell me.
Dr. Matthew Adams.
Yeah, Matt Adams, man, he was good. And we talked about the endocannabinoid system and how oh, dude, that was a whole
That
rabbit
sounds
hole. It
dope.
was awesome.
I'm gonna go check out that episode.
And he
Fuck yeah,
knows
and
all
we
about
will maybe have you and him on together, and we can fucking
that'd
jam.
probably be a badass
That'd
fucking
be
episode.
awesome. That'd be great.
He's, he's
Yeah, I mean,
into the whole he doesn't like to call it sovereign citizen. What is it called? State national?
State national. Yeah, he
State
was like the sovereign
national,
citizen
dude.
shit is
Oh,
just bullshit. It's a rap.
okay.
It's a total bullshit scam when
Interesting.
a lot of it is. And yeah, he was
Interesting.
telling us about some of it. But like he's got one angle. Those guys that call themselves sovereign, that's one angle. Then there's like 7 other angles that will all disagree.
Yeah, dude. It's
I remember I
wild.
kept asking Matt, I was like, all right, so where's the source of this? Like, where can I read this and see this? And he's like, well, it was just like this kind of roundabout answer. I'm like, yeah, but where can I read that how you found out
He's
that
like, it's in my book. He's like, it's in my book.
and
No
everybody
offense, but-
else is worth $3 million by the age of 18 on the stock market. And if you go around some rules, you can fucking just get access to that money. And that sounds like, no offense to Dr. Matt Adams, because the endocannabinoid stuff was awesome. I hope he's being safe with this other law shit, because I don't know. It sounds way too good to be true in some respects, but I don't know. That was just my take on that part of it. The whole us being
I've heard about that
every individual.
a
I know I've
long
heard that
time,
too.
You know,
that like
but-
we're all millionaires and we just don't know how to get access to it. I'm just like,
I know.
money's a
I
trap
know.
already.
I know. So it's like, it's just a fucking. It's gotta be, dude. It's gotta be.
It's like, no, Bitcoin, man. It's uncentralized. We got to keep it. What, faker money than our already fake money? Oh, awesome. Great.
Faker-
And now it can just get turned
faker
off if I
money.
drop it in a puddle. Awesome. Sorry, Vince. Go
No,
ahead.
you're good.
That was just-
The Bitcoin thing is actually another good example. A good example of this concept where is something that is presented as a counterculture, but when you actually look at what's going on, you can tell that the power behind it is rooted in the government.
Oh yeah.
And if we want to get into the connection between the internet and the psychedelics and how the research on the psychedelics directly played into the birth of the personal computer culture,
Absolutely.
we can totally dig into that. But I just wanted to say this point about the art of war. Thanks for your patience out there.
Absolutely.
Great points, actually. I'm really excited to check out that podcast, and it would be an honor to talk with him, and I'm gonna go check out his work.
Hell yeah, man.
So in Baltimore, which is so I was at a conference up there, and there was a dude by the name of Neil Franklin, who had been a cop in Baltimore in the Baltimore PD for like years and years and years. And I think he had served in the military for a few years before that and stuff. And he was actually really cool because he was a cop who saw what he was doing was wrong and stopped doing it.
Wow.
And, like people might say, hey, weren't you just talking about the infiltration of the counterculture? Here's a cop. And so there's layers to it. I think that Neil Franklin as an individual is a good dude. I don't like personally know him, but the information that he shares in his talks is just like, it's pretty powerful stuff. So I was attending a talk that he was giving at this conference. It was back in like 2018 or so. And this barely even, it barely registered then, but it just planted enough of a seed that later bloomed into something. But in his talk, Neil Franklin said, and this is actually out there on YouTube, if people want to go look at it, I have a link to it on my Substack. But he tells us, he was like, so the audience is all people who are trying to change the drug laws. It's all young people in college who want to change our nation's drug laws.
Yeah.
And his message for us, he had a lot to say, obviously, but one key thing is he said, everybody in this room should read The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And he said, the reason why you should read this book is because all the people you're fighting, that is their manual.
One of them, yeah.
And the military, the intelligence. And he didn't go super into detail, but he was pretty cool. And he was like, look, people, like, you should check out this book. If you want to know who you're up against and what they're doing, read The Art of War. He was a cop. He was in the military, and he said, like, people who are cops and in the military, and that book is like a Bible to them. And that, I kind of was like, oh, that's interesting, because I like the history and stuff. I was like, oh, huh. But I had never read The Art of War. I was like, okay, I didn't really know how to apply it. So I was like, cool. But then, like, years later, I remembered, like, didn't Neil Franklin say something about The Art of War? And so I got a copy and I read the whole thing. And it literally, it was like he said, I felt like I was reading an instruction manual for the war on drugs.
Wow.
And
Wow.
no, seriously. I mean, I've already written about this on my Substack, and it's going to be a key part of the beginning of High and Mighty, because I break down for people how all this stuff that we're seeing in the last few decades, last few years, even right now, this is like ancient political science.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
not anything new. Like, and there's a number of things that Sun Tzu says. One, which is what I think just like describes the war on drugs to a T. There's a line in The Art of War where he says, seize what your enemy holds dear. Because when they cannot have what they need, they will feel helpless, and it will be even easier to manipulate them and conquer them. And of course, the text is vague on purpose because it is supposed to be adaptable to many situations. So it's like,
And
what your
people use
enemy
it for
holds
like
dear.
personal,
Yes.
like for
Yes.
positive things many
Yes.
times too. Yeah.
So like, seize what your enemy holds dear, you know, it could mean like, oh yeah, that piece of land that the other nation's military needs to get to us or whatever. That's like on the surface level. But when you realize that Alan Dulles and all the cops and all these guys are reading The Art of War, seize what your enemy holds dear. To me, that's like drug prohibition. I mean, like, part of my learning is that drug use is an inherently natural part of life. You know, like, it's not anything unusual. Every single person alive will consume a drug at one point or another, whether that's like sugar,
I was just
tea,
gonna say
coffee,
sugar, brother.
prescriptions. I mean, I argue salt is a drug because
Yeah.
technically you actually do not need salt to live. And there were, that's a whole other thing I could get into, but the drugs that, like, the things that your enemy holds dear could be anything. But because Neil Franklin had told us to read The Art of War and apply it to the war on drugs, that's what I was doing. And that, I mean, it fits. And then, but the thing is, there's so much more. So like, there's a couple different parts of The Art of War where he talks about hiding order in a cloak of disorder, where you want to make it look to the public like it's just, they have no idea what's going on. Who knows? It's just people doing their thing. This is all just a bunch of chaos. We don't know. We're just our government trying to protect you guys.
Right.
But like, within the disorder and the chaos is how, that's where Sun Tzu says that's where the action is. That's where you should be controlling everything. Absolutely. So that actually everything that people look at and they see is uncontrolled, you already have a plan for, you already know about, you're already aware of, you already have 10 different plans for how you're going to handle it. And again, like, this is basic political science. I think The Art of War came out around like the 3rd or 4th century BC. And like every major like military leader, and not, I don't want to overgeneralize, but I mean, this is like a classic, like a lot of the big people. And if you read their memoirs and biographies, so like why this is relevant to the war on drugs, right? In Alan Dulles has a book, I think it's called The Art of Intelligence or something like that.
Jesus, really?
Oh yeah. And
what a prick.
It's like
not even hiding it.
No, yeah, exactly. They're not even hiding it. Like, they're counting on us to just like not put it together.
Isn't that the whole karma thing?
Yeah,
what I'm worried about is that they're like using us, the creatives of the world, to bring about a world they want or something.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we can get into that, but that's theory. But that's kind of like, just real quick, to like what you were saying about the, you know, the formation of all this, like the fact that they're the ones that are that were also obsessed with these ideas.
Yeah.
That's like a really central theme in why they're pushing it on us. And I think that's where I was kind of shouting about, we don't know the motive. We don't know the motive
Yeah.
because it's coming from
Yes.
the secret societies, but
Yeah.
from a very
Yeah.
like religious point of view.
Yeah.
But then that's debatable. Or
Well,
are they just
you're
putting
right.
that shit out there for us to
No.
think that
Well,
they're like,
yeah.
because think about it,
Okay.
I come from the conspiracy community, man. So
Mm.
most people in my community, and good love to them, I love everybody, but I don't agree with everybody when they call this some satanic takeover that's happening,
Yes.
because
Okay.
I already know that word doesn't mean what they think it means, because I like language.
Yeah.
A lot of the shit that
Etymology.
Okay.
yeah, and a lot of
Yeah.
the fucking religion that I studied like fucking dates Egypt by thousands of years as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's where my head's at. And it's like everything gets related back to Babylon, Sumer, Egypt. But
Yeah.
these were even adaptations of symbolism and things like that. But these,
Yeah.
whatever they're involved in, they're either, I
Okay.
don't know. That's a
Well,
that's a lot.
no,
right
no.
there.
You just said a lot of great things. And what's wild, all right, so you just characterized, okay, you just made a lot of great points. You,
Half points.
first you said, I'm really interested in how the government controls the art and the creative people in our society and uses that for their agenda, all right? And then you mentioned something about like that this is all supposed to be too complicated for us to put together and to understand. And you mentioned something about like with the religious, you were talking about how there's a school of thought that this is all a satanic like conspiracy. And
the Vatican is
right, well,
divine
yeah.
serpent, like
Right,
Vatica,
so
you know.
you made a great point though, where you asked like, is that actually their goal, or is there a deeper goal and they're just doing that? Okay, so
Right, or
and
throwing
you
that at us.
characterized all of those questions and that knowledge as conspiracy stuff, right?
Right,
But
and I
actually,
agree with some of it, or
Well,
to
yeah,
some extent, you know.
but all the things that you are actually saying more or less align to stuff that Aristotle was writing about in politics
Mhm.
and that Plato was writing about in the Republic. Okay, so both Plato and Aristotle, they actually wrote about you need to control the music of a society.
Mm.
Because
Oh,
if the
wow.
music literally it's and
This is beautiful.
and these are the classics that the people who rule our lives are studying this shit in
I was
Ivy
quoting Plato all the
classrooms
time,
with
man.
air
I was
conditioning. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, it's,
dude, the cave, man, the
yeah.
cave.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
Plato's
Well,
my hero.
Oh, and the cave is heavy, but there's a lot more. There's a lot more. And like,
Enemies tell the truth too.
yeah,
Right in
yeah.
our
Oh, exactly.
faces.
Yeah. Okay. So you also said, they don't want us to be able to have the, or I don't want to paraphrase, but
Sorry.
you made a good point about like, this is not designed for us to be able to know what's going on. Like we're just doing our thing and living our lives and think this is what's happening. Like that is also out of Aristotle. So in politics, he says for tyrants who want to like maintain their order, what they can do is keep the working class so busy and so distracted that they don't have enough time or energy to have a revolution. Okay.
That's perfect.
So this
yeah.
is literally in Aristotle, and you're saying like, this is just some conspiracy stuff, but like,
No. I'm saying
Yeah.
that it's in
Yeah.
conspiracy,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
taken as just
Yeah.
conspiracy. But
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out the importance of this religious aspect of it. That
Yeah.
even though it's not satanic in the way that I think a lot of people
Yeah.
perceive this to be
Yes.
a reptile. Okay, let me phrase this better.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the community, and I'm friends with a lot of them, we talk about this often together, is that this is like aliens, reptilians,
Right.
they're in secret, they're in,
Right.
it's all connected, right? And
right.
I agree to a certain extent that is exactly what's being put out there for
Yeah.
a select group of people,
Right.
mostly
Yeah.
creatives, people
Yeah.
that grew up jaded, people
Yeah.
that grew up that didn't
Yeah.
fit in with normal
Yeah, yeah.
society.
Yeah.
They are calling to us
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
buy into something
Yeah. Well,
over and over and over again. But it's there's a truth layer, But then
Yeah.
there's the psycho bullshit layer
Oh, totally.
where serpent symbolism was
Yeah.
the elite class.
Right.
Where
And-
now it's reptilians, right? Because we're looking at the Egyptian hieroglyphics. We know these were the bad guys. We know it, but there's a select group of us that think they're reptilians and hiding and things like that. And then even if people don't believe directly in this physical reptilian take, like David Icke stuff,
Nephilim giants.
Nephilim giants. Now,
right.
oh my God, there's a lot of history there, but
Totally.
but also they still think of a supernatural side to this, even because of psychedelics in some cases.
Right.
And
exactly.
there is an element there because these secret societies do blood rituals. Like and whether it's all for some show or not, like the Alex Jones footage of fucking inside Bohemian Grove back in the 90s.
Oh yeah.
And the cremation of care with all these fucking rich people doing either a fake ritual or a real one.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. Like, I talked to my dad about that, who's very against all conspiracy. And I'm like, okay, Dad, but you have to accept the fact then, if none of it's real, if it's not some sacred old ancient blood cult or whatever it is behind, that we don't know any details of, honestly, you'd have to accept the fact that your government wants people to think there is. And that's when he was like, shit.
Well,
Fuck.
Did you do a show recently that talked about Project Bluebeam?
Yeah, I was we talked about it like this much, and
so
that was introduced by Jack Valet. He was talking
yeah.
about World War I and how there was operations that wanted to project Muhammad or Jesus over enemy battalions and stuff like that.
There's an interesting book out there by an author named Annie Jacobson. It's called
I've heard of her.
Area 51. She's a actually really great author.
Did she go on Rogan and talk about like
yes,
that the
all
Russians
the
were
stuff.
the Russian babies or kids were in the UFO or something?
She argued,
I like that angle.
she argued that a lot of the alien stuff emerged as an alternative explanation for these military and like these war games and stuff that were going on between Russia and us during the Cold War.
Yeah.
I didn't write the book. I didn't see the documents. She did, but her argument is like very convincing, and I think it's worth checking out for people who are into this stuff. But there's a lot going on here, right? So, like, I don't know if are you familiar with like how the lead singer from Blink-182 rocks like a free? It sounds silly, right?
Oh, dude, I'm deep in it, man. I argue with these people all the time. I tag him on Twitter like an asshole.
This actually wild, right? The lead singer from Blink-182,
Tom DeLonge, yeah.
Yes, he started a group with a longtime CIA guy.
Yep.
And their whole thing is like aliens.
Yeah, TTSA, To the Stars
exactly.
Academy. And the thing is, if you go to their website and you look into the details, they're a production company for movies for the most part. And his talking points are that, it's like fictional creations to inspire us in this direction.
Right,
I'm like,
exactly.
so predictive programming and control. Okay, no problem. No problem.
Right.
Fucking Mr. Pop Punk.
And then to tie it back to your point where it's like, is the religious thing really their real goal, or is that just a way of control? Okay. Another thing that Aristotle says in politics is it's important for the ruler to appear to be religious.
Right.
Even if you don't really believe that shit, at least go to church so the public thinks you do.
Right.
Because
well, that's okay. That's for the politicians, but those are fucking puppets. They ain't the real power.
But think about
Does Rothschild go to fucking?
Well, but he's writing about it because there's so many layers to it, right? Where it's like a person who belongs to a religion, from the perspective of the government, like they understand religions to an extent. It's something they've been around before. It's not something new. There's laws for it. So by playing the example for the public of like, oh, our president is blank, like fill in the blank. He's whatever. He's Christian. He's Catholic, whatever. It's like, oh, look, they take their oath on the Bible. Oh, there's pictures of them going to church. It plants the mind in the public's, not plant the mind, sorry. It plants the image in the public's mind that the powerful people are like God-fearing people. And like, we read the Bible too. And some form of religion is good. Now, how that ties to the alien stuff is this, right? The Freemasons, and I'm sorry to keep taking it back to that, but it ties into the psychedelics too, right?
Yeah.
It's a requirement in Freemasonry that you belong to a religion. It
Yes.
doesn't
Or
matter which
believe in a
one.
higher power. Yes.
Exactly. Like that you have some type of spiritual belief or go to some kind of church or whatever. In other words, they don't want people who don't submit themselves to like a higher force. And that sounds all well and good. It's like, yeah, cool, let's all be pious, right? But just think about, why would a fraternal organization have as a requirement for entry that you believe in a higher power? They are at nature a hierarchical group. So by manipulating your access to the higher power, they can control your social life, all this kind of stuff. How does this apply to the aliens and the psychedelics? Okay, so I just posted on Twitter. So I guess this is gonna be coming out on Friday, and this is on Thursday night. So on Thursday, I posted on Twitter, and I also shared an excerpt on my Substack about how the DMT research in the 90s. I don't know if y'all are familiar with like Rick Strassman and the Spirit. Yep, exactly. So what a lot of people don't know is that that was funded by the Freemasons.
Whoa, I did not know that, because he did not. I didn't hear.
He literally.
I'm gonna read his book again.
Read his book from cover to cover and don't skip any lines. He literally
never
says,
did, but I wasn't looking for this. I was so swept up in the experiences.
Exactly.
You know,
same dude. I read
same
the
with
Spirit
Terrence McKenna
Molecule.
speeches.
I read the whole Spirit Molecule at least two or three times, and
Nice.
it was the same for me. Where like the first time I read it, I was thinking about the geometry and the aliens and whoa, all this stuff. But I read it again and again, and I realized in the acknowledgments, he's like, "I'd like to thank Daniel X. Friedman and the Scottish Rite Foundation for their generous contribution to my work." And then later on, if you actually read the book, he says, "Oh, my friend Daniel Friedman, he helped me get the approval from the FDA that I needed, and he also sat on the board of the Scottish Rite Foundation." And it turns out, which is the public name for the Freemasons, like the Scottish Rite Foundation is the traditional public name. If you look up a Masonic group, a lot of them are some branch of the Scottish Rite Foundation. It goes back to the history, all this kind of stuff. But and then in the Spirit Molecule, I don't know off the top of my head which page number, but I do write about this in my last book, Drugism. He explains how his relationship to this guy named Friedman, who he heavily implies but doesn't explicitly state that he's a Mason, because it's like, to be on the board of the Scottish Rite Foundation, I would presume that I don't think they would be having people who aren't Freemasons on their board. I don't know. So I can't say like, I know Daniel Friedman was a Freemason, but
he's adjacent to a lot of bad things. Yeah.
And Rick Strassman said that he sat on the board for the Scottish Rite Foundation, which is because what a lot of people also may not be aware of is that the Scottish Rite Foundation had already funded DMT research in the 70s.
Oh, they were doing, well, yeah, that makes sense. They created the hippie revolution.
Well, yeah, there's a whole lot there, right?
Oh,
and
Laurel Canyon.
Right,
you know about Laurel Canyon?
Yeah, totally.
Oh yeah.
And so Strassman got the plug to the Freemason money from this dude Friedman, and then this other guy that he met at Stanford named Harmon, Willis
familiar.
Harmon, Harman. He worked at the Stanford Research Institute,
MK Ultra,
all that stuff.
Basically.
He was actually close personal friends with Rick Strassman, and they had a couple of long conversations about the direction that Harman thought that the research and the movement should go in. And it's really crazy. And Strassman writes about this in his books. And he writes in one of his books, it was due to, and here, I actually, you know what, I don't want to misquote, so I'm just going to pull it up.
Sure, grab it, man. Yeah.
I actually just wrote about this in the excerpt that I just did on my Substack. So if the listeners out there want to read along with me.
Oh, and we'll be definitely tagging or, linking.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure
too.
They can find all my links and my Twitter and stuff. Yeah. But so what Strassman said, he said it is, quote, in response to his request that I include, and by his request he means Harmon,
Yeah.
that I include in this book highly speculative ideas, and then he goes on to explain like alien encounter, like is DMT a portal to aliens, and like is DMT the key to spiritual experience, and like the all this kind of stuff. So he actually openly says that he was specifically asked to associate DMT with these ideas by Willis Harmon, who worked at Stanford at a department that did chemical weapons research that was backed by the military. It's all, and so it's like, okay, so this dude who worked at Stanford on LSD research, and if you read into Harmon's history, it's just crazy. And I don't mean to keep using that word because I know some people don't like the word crazy. I'm sorry. I was literally in a mental institution, so like I'm sorry if I keep using that word, but anyway, that was kind of random, but
no worries, brother.
Yeah, Harmon. Okay, so Harmon is telling Strassman, "Hey, I think you should like write about how DMT might be some alien stuff, or like it might be the key to all the religions." And then you have the Friedman guy with the Freemasons, who is helping him get the money. So if you look at like, and again, because this goes to your opening question, the driving forces, like,
yeah,
like what are the driving forces behind all this stuff, right? Like, as I said, I smoked DMT obsessively as a teenager. I read Rick Strassman, and I didn't even notice this stuff about the Freemasons because I was
me neither, man. I was obsessed. Yeah, I would skip over who fucking suggested it to him. That's nuts.
But then if you actually read his book again, it's like, okay, so he was getting money from the Masons. He was being told what to write about by this dude who did, it's just like Harmon at Stanford, all kinds of weird stuff there. Like those that's what I see as the driving forces. And then it's like, why would the Freemasons be into this stuff? So it's interesting. The DMT heads out there may know that one of the family of species that is the highest of the natural sources of DMT is the acacia trees. And
the burning bush thing.
Yeah, I mean, oh yeah, there's a whole lot there to it.
Yeah, like Mr. Joe Rogan, Mr. I'm not bought off.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot there.
He's the new Terrence McKenna, man.
Mr. I'm not
he's McKenna for the 21st century.
Well, okay, so
he's selling it all.
I'm also
he approves every new hero for us along the way. All the talking heads that we're supposed to listen to. I'm not, even if you're not a fan of him, he gets conversations going between all the people that we're supposed to be in place and hearing from.
No, totally.
That's a rant. So on its
own. It's a very relevant rant. Like, I mean, I'm doing an interview that'll be out like later with Danny Katz, who's on YouTube, and she did a video about like, she looked at the PhD thesis of Lex Friedman, which is about like monitoring and influencing behavior change.
Whoa.
He's the new out
with computer networks. And then she's
1920s all over again.
And she starts putting together all the pieces and stuff. And you know, this directly ties into what was going on with the psychedelics. Like anyway,
and in social behavior, like the House of Truth. So I've learned I got to turn you on to a guy. I've had him on my show a billion times.
Yeah.
His name is Dwayne, and he runs Bulletproof Publishers, bulletproofpub.com.
Okay.
And he has a ton. This is his wheelhouse of where this stuff comes from. Yeah. And you're hitting on points that some of which he hits on, some of which he doesn't focus on. Yeah. And it's just more pieces of the puzzle. And he always says, we got to find the others that are telling this story, that are looking at this stuff and can run with it. And
totally.
Yeah. So I see a lot of, I mean, not to cut the story off here or stop the convo, but I see a lot of good collaboration happening to untwist some crazy shit in history.
Totally.
Up ahead of us, so that's good news. I think this is good. How do you liking this, Shane? What are your thoughts so far on all this?
This is fucking blowing my mind, dude. I don't even know what to say.
It fits so many pieces, right?
I'm gonna take a bong here.
I have
hell yeah, man! Cheers.
I want to hear your thoughts, though.
Crazy thoughts.
What are your crazy thoughts?
I've definitely said them at least on my show once, or you probably heard me say this before, but like, what if What if, like, boom, right now, consciousness just popped into Shane here talking in this podcast, and reality was just now created for me. I have all the memories of Shane's whole life, but every existence duality, boom, just started right now, and all this story is just here for me to go along and do what I please with it. And not saying there's no karma along with yourself, you
Right.
know, but what do you guys think about that?
Man, yeah. So Shane's
I also have a
higher than
second
me.
thought on it. That's
But
just where my brain has like
no, but I hear
always
you because
been.
that's where all of our conversations, even if we're talking about all the bad guys versus
Big red
good
button.
guys and who it's from and where it's going, no matter what, right?
What
We
if all
come
the
back to
evil?
our red button that we talk about.
What if all the evil is ultimately for good?
Right. Or yeah, we're part of a, like that's the thing. That's the thing. Like one thing they can't do with psychedelics is they can't tell you, they can't program what the psychedelics are going to show you because the psychedelics don't even do it. The psychedelics fit like receptors into our brains. We know that. And then
Yeah, there's
boom, they
amplifiers.
allow a situation like Aldous Huxley, shady as fuck as he is. He was right in describing it to us as like a reducing valve or like something like that, where psychedelics basically just hold a door open for all the experience that we're already having and containing in this survival mode, this fight or flight mode, to kind of relax and start to start to see things for the way they really are for a minute amongst all our anxieties just from coming out of the womb and going from one extreme to another, you know?
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. But no, I'm Shane, what you were saying, like, yeah, it all comes down to like this ultimate, like what psychedelics have shown us really.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like consciousness is way beyond self or individual selves. I love Walter Russell's work. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, Vince, but he's a man that, like, no matter what people think about Einstein, in his dying days, he said that that was one of his biggest regrets was to not study the work of Walter Russell that was handed to him years earlier. And now Walter Russell is gaining some speed with his universal one theory and stuff like that. A lot of crazy stuff, but that's kind of what I've gotten from psychedelics. And I see it out there in the physical world or from other people. And I go, so that we must have pinged on some noble truth there or something like that, you know? And Shane and I often talk about how the individual selves are all illusory and there is only one thing here, really. A lot of physicists say this. And I don't find that to be, and a lot of people in my community would, to be the distraction or the lie.
Yeah.
I don't find that to be the lie, but
I think that's the experience and the knowledge that they would like to gatekeep, basically.
right. Yeah. But
And
it's coming out though. That's what I see everywhere from a lot of, again,
so-
like controlled
but
people that are supposed to be counterculture, you know?
yeah. Well, and there's many different dimensions to it where, like you asked earlier, like even though they're pointing us in one direction, is that actually the direction that their head is at personally, or are they on some other stuff? But then what Shane said, like it also, I don't, maybe I'm just, I don't know, like maybe I've been reading too much Plato, but like what Shane described, it reminded me of another passage from Plato where he used very, very comparable language about the construction of consciousness, like coming from different sources, being affected by different things. And he wrote something along the lines of that, like the various forces of life are like strings which are pulling on our souls in different directions, kind of. And it's interesting because that is also actually another passage that if like I just noticed more recently, like I thought that was kind of cool already when I was reading Plato, and then I just learned a few weeks ago that that Gordon Wasson actually quotes that line from Plato to try to explain like what the mushrooms can allow you to see. So like I think there's a lot of truth to what both of you are saying. Everything that y'all have said so far, I immediately, it's like, yes, there's, you know, it is consistent with the themes that I've seen in my own research. And I think there's a lot going on here. And yeah, I mean,
It's
One
definitely
thing I haven't talked about a whole lot is the chaos of, I guess I have, but like even when I was in, the singularity experience I've talked about a whole lot, I've experienced singularity before, and it was, infinite love and bliss of the love of every kind you could think of. And eventually it got boring, and it was like I wanted to move on, but I'm not sure if it's so hard to even recall that experience. I just have like a bits of it.
of course.
And but there was still a chaos to it. It was like I felt bored, like I felt love and bliss for eternity, but also feeling like bored for eternity. So like it wasn't like it was like, yeah, I want to fucking get things going again. Boom, duality, get some fucking humans killing shit and
Yeah, man. Yeah, that's why I think I agree. And Shane and I talk
but
about
I
that
I
a lot.
don't
Oh,
feel
sorry,
like
man. Go ahead.
the personality part of it that was still somehow there, you know, um initiated it. It was still like there was some sort of karma or something that still had to even be worked out within source or singularity, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah, I like
And
that.
yeah.
I'll just put all of my psychedelic experiences have never been like I'm gonna fucking like my best friend's gonna walk in the door right now. Like maybe, or like I don't know. I haven't like manifested anything. I guess I can't say that, but like I can't fucking fly. Or I can't like use the
I know
force
what
or
you're
some shit.
I know what
Yeah.
you're saying. I think I have an idea of what you're saying, and I agree, which is like we think of these drugs that they'll give us almost like a magical experience that will somehow like change the way that we relate to reality, but like you do them again and again and again and then kind of realize like they're drugs that you put in your body and they make you feel cool and sure, I mean like I'm not trying to reduce it to that, but like um your whole thing about like in the early stages this consciousness is bliss, but then it begins to turn into boredom. And then I think one of you said a while back, it's like you spend so much time in that headspace that it begins to question you. It's like what are you doing here? Like why are you here again? And like I can relate to that. And but I think what's important for us to keep in mind is that like this stuff is still all pretty new for a lot of the population. So
Mm-hmm.
and even though we have our devoted followers who may have tripped super hard and can keep up with everything that we're saying, it's like there are a lot of people out there who have only tripped a couple times and their lives are being totally like changed right now by these experiences. And it's like what you said earlier about the solipsis, like
Yeah, dude.
it's a very common thought when you're tripping to think that like you are the only person who has even like figured this out, which is kind of related.
Yeah.
It's like, and then that will very easily kind of turn into the solipsis where it's like, well, if I'm the only one who realizes this, maybe I actually am and then you get the Jesus freaks on acid where people eat a bunch of tabs and then they think that they're the walking New Testament and every word that they say is the
Or the
truth
new millennium.
and word gives life. And it's like I've tripped enough to have been around those vibes but it's like eventually, I don't know. I know that what we're saying might sound off the wall to people out there, but I think as time goes on, as more people just like trip their brains out, like whatever happens to them, they learn in like over years, what does this do? Doing it again and again, like what are you really doing here? I think over time more and more people will resonate with what we're saying. That's just my opinion. That's been my own experience with the psychedelics so far, because like back when I started the Psych Society, it felt like it was new to even be talking about these things.
Oh yeah.
So a lot of people were kind of just getting into them, and like
And when was that again? When did you start that? Like
March
2000
of 2017.
Okay.
Yeah.
I felt the same way though, which is
Yeah.
crazy. And people, it's always like this because
Yeah.
I felt the same way in the early 2000s. I
Yeah.
was obsessed with all these writers, you know,
Right.
the
Yeah.
all of it,
Oh, yeah.
and no one would listen. It was,
Yes.
and
Yes.
that's the weird part of going through what's happening right now is that
Exactly.
suddenly all my enemies are saying what I was saying, and
Yeah.
they're saying it's their
Exactly.
ideas. Not that I want credit. I'm saying
No, no,
like,
no, 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 no.
what the fuck?
I agree with you.
And
Yeah.
and then I start to look at the good guys that are wicked famous, or not even good guys, but the guys I looked up to in quote unquote
Right.
counterculture
Right.
that were
Right.
also promoting all of it. And it's like, shit,
Right.
it's all one big game.
Yeah.
It's not that necessarily that truths espoused have no meaning, but you just got to know that it's like 30-70, right, Shane? 30% truth, 70% covered in shit. You know, like
Whereas
Terrence McKenna, when I was listening to thousands of hours of him over and over again, I had hundreds of hours of audio of his lectures on my iPod back in the early after 2003 when I graduated high school, getting like some remedial landscaping job, making minimum wage, fucking listening to him all the time for 10 hours a day. And never once did I notice him talking about we need a one-child policy across this whole planet and to have a global alliance to do this and all this global shit.
Should have
What was wrong with me? I just wanted to hear about his elves.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
My fancy DMT elves suck me off.
But now I listen to his audio of him telling a quote unquote joke about how after the FBI was on his tail in La Chorrera, that, well, they recruited me. And I'm just like,
right.
That's different now.
I think someone by the name of Jan Irvin.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
Y'all know about him?
Yeah, because he went, and Dennis has tried to discredit him,
right?
And is the bigger voice, and Jan is the conspiracy theorist. But but here's an angle to that. What if that's all just part of the act? Because Jan has reinvented himself many times after burning many people, and has supposedly been an FBI informant. Not to say too much.
However you feel about the rest of what Jan Irvin has said and done, whatever. The only reason I brought up his name,
a lot of truth.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, to his credit, he was putting together these pieces like years ago, right?
Yeah.
The reason I'm bringing this up is because you particularly mentioned the Terrence McKenna quote where he said something about they were something like
they recruited me and now they've had me in PR for the past 15 years. Yeah.
And like, so it's interesting. Like, I just want to say up front, I am totally open to the idea that Terrence McKenna was involved in some type of intelligence operation. In fact, I wrote about that in my last book.
Did you? Okay, I got to read your last book.
Yeah, there's a piece on my Substack about how the first hit of DMT that Terrence McKenna ever took, he said came from Stanford, from the same department.
Bro.
Remember our friend Willis Harmon? They were under the impression that their DMT came from those labs because his friend Rick, I believe Rick Watson, who was he was a good buddy of Terrence McKenna's since they were young. They went to school together. His friend Rick, who was a chemistry student at Stanford, he was personally acquainted with the people in the Stanford labs who were conducting the psychedelic research.
Dude,
it's just... He told this guy named Graham St. John published a pretty cool book about DMT. The title is some crazy title. I'm not even going to try to remember it off the top of my head, but it's a very cool book. But he explained that Rick told him that the people he knew at Stanford were working with DMT, and then in his correspondence with St. John, there's all these clues that Rick himself is not even really sure, and like maybe it like yeah, maybe I did get the DMT from Stanford and maybe it was all an operation, but it's like he himself, like this is all so heavy that it's almost like he himself has not even really like fully, it's like, and
Right.
I understand that, and I've noticed that with a lot of people in the field who are, you know, who are very close to all of the action, where their consciousness is very heavy with like, was what I did good or bad? Like, which is kind of what we were talking about. I mean, it really is like the whole idea of the useful idiot and stuff. But
Yeah,
to get
absolutely. And that's the
like,
thing. A lot of truth from Terrence
yeah,
and all of
yeah,
these
exactly,
people. And I think there is a lot of unwilling participants as
yeah,
well. There's
yeah,
more unwilling than
yeah,
like, yeah, let's fuck humanity. Like,
right,
there's not a lot of them, I don't think.
right. So I just want to clarify though that personally, I'm not I'm not personally convinced that the one quote from Terrence McKenna that
Fair enough.
Irving has drawn attention to, I respect his research, but that particular quote just doesn't do it for me, because I've
That's
read
fair.
the whole passage, and like it's pretty clear he's talking about mushrooms. But look, I could be wrong. I'm not trying to say that um that Jan Irvin's overall thesis is wrong, or that Terrence McKenna was not working with the feds. For all we know, like they're both correct. I don't know, but I'm just going to explain this for, or I have been explaining this for listeners, because this is some interesting back history for people who have already been exploring these for years. Because what Andy explained kind of, or what he alluded to, is that when Irvin, I mean, when Irvin even began to publish this kind of stuff, like he immediately was like a reject. And he had also personally spent time with a lot of the big names and stuff, but then he started putting together these pieces and was like an outcast, and people would like laugh about his work. And I think there is a lot of stuff to his work that is worth checking out, but I do almost think he did himself a disservice with the McKenna thing. And like, maybe it's true, but like, here's the thing is like, a lot of Irvin's research was pretty solid, but by being so adamant that like, yes, Terrence McKenna was a fan and this obscure quote in one speech about mushrooms is the proof, it's like, if he had even just said like maybe, and not like, yeah, it's like, it's interesting because I have a lot of respect for his other work and research, but that particular quote just doesn't do it for me. And I think that like his story is just a good, I don't know, like I'm still learning from it honestly myself, because like it's a really good example of like the relationship between like people like ourselves who are trying to draw attention to these more uncomfortable aspects. It's like how careful we have to be with every single fact and every single source, because it's like, I don't know, it's
You're
interesting.
right. Integrity, man. And it is
Yeah, well,
integrity, and it's
and
something
I'm
we
not
have
trying
to
to
have.
diss
And
Jan
I'm using
Irvin
it
at all.
anecdotally, honestly. Like
Yeah, no, totally.
I don't hold desperately to it, but I do put it
Yeah,
out there for
right.
people. I put out his big speech about how
Yeah,
every woman should have one child and this control state, but that it's a beautiful control state. You know,
yeah, I never even heard that quote, which is very
I can
interesting.
link you to it, but
I
yeah,
think
that, and the thing is
so.
I do think that even a man like Terrence, sorry to cut you off, just
No, go for it.
a man like Terrence and others like him, that may have been involved to some degree. I think again we could go back to this idea of the useful idiot,
Yeah,
because like in regards to like being brought up to think a certain way,
yeah,
again you just need, he wasn't a hippie from the 60s. The MK Ultra, the control of culture through psychedelics and drugs and rock and roll, all that stuff was already going on long before Terrence was an adult. Like he's a, I mean, I don't want to say
yeah.
victim, but like he's a
I mean,
product of it, just like
yeah,
you said from the very beginning, how our
yes,
culture was
yes,
indoctrinated into this.
yes,
So is
yes,
he. So
totally,
he's a
absolutely,
deliverer of the message as well. He's not,
100%,
you know, and I agree with
100%.
that.
So
Yeah.
here's what I'm actually really glad you brought up Terrence and even that quote, because like I've actually kind of been wanting to like to talk about this, and
Cool.
this show is really the perfect place for this, which is like, even though I don't necessarily agree with that one particular quote or whatever about the agents and the mushrooms and stuff, that like his thesis did cause me to question things, and I did go back and very closely examine Terence McKenna's life. Now, what is interesting is he grew up in Colorado, and it's just there's a lot of interesting stuff that was going on in Colorado, and of course now they're at the forefront of the movement with the mushrooms and the
Yeah.
decriminalization and all the stuff.
Everybody's
And
following their lead, even California, which is
yeah,
crazy.
yeah, well, exactly. And what's interesting is like when Terence McKenna was when Terence and Dennis both were kids, their mother actually was the personal assistant to Henry Kaiser, which I don't know if either of you are familiar of.
That name rings a bell.
He's a huge industrialist. He started the healthcare operator like Kaiser, but he also had a
Kaiser Permanente or whatever.
yes.
Oh,
He also had a company where he would like do construction and architecture for the government and stuff like that. He
yeah,
was
I mean,
tight.
construction.
Well, he was one of these guys who had a lot of money, and when you have a lot of money, you can kind of do whatever you want.
Yeah,
you
you
know?
just
So-
own companies. Yeah. all over
and
the place.
yeah, he got a lot of contracts from the government, and he was very close with like the president. Like I forget, I want to say FDR, but I'm not 100% sure. But Henry Kaiser is an interesting figure. Now, what's also is interesting is that another person who worked at the Kaiser Foundation in the same period that Terence McKenna's mother was the personal assistant for Henry Kaiser was Timothy Leary. A lot of his early research about the personality was done for Kaiser. And in that same time period, I don't know if y'all know this, but way before he got into the acid and the mushrooms, Tim Leary actually wrote a questionnaire that was used by the CIA for their new recruits. And inside the agency, they called it the Leary test. So it'd be like, oh, did you give the new guy the Leary test yet? And it probably was something they did in conjunction with, like, you know, how there's like the lie detectors and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There's like a whole process.
He was a psychologist. He was a high-ranking
And
psychologist.
he was, yeah, and he was working at the University of California at Berkeley, which is another heavy institution, which you'll dig this. The Berkeley campus of the University of California was established by a very high-ranking Skull and Bonesman. So it's just crazy. Like, if for people out there who are into the Skull and Bone stuff and want to connect the dots back that far,
yeah, I am.
the campus that Leary was doing his early research at was Berkeley, which there's a lot of drugs at Berkeley. There was also a lot of like radical backlash among the students at Berkeley, and then a very strong like reaction from, but anyway, that's a whole other thing. But Tim Leary, while he was making this questionnaire for the CIA and was working for the Kaiser Foundation, we have McKenna. And then it's interesting because Colorado, I'm honestly still trying to figure that one out. I think the CIA had announced that they were planning to move their headquarters out to Denver at some point, but I don't know if that actually materialized.
Wow.
But I do think,
like the airport.
yeah, there's something going on out there, and like, I'm not trying to say anything I don't know, because I will admit I still have to do more research on Colorado. But I think it's interesting because another dot to connect to Colorado is that Tim Scully and Owsley Stanley, who were cooking up a lot of the acid and stuff in the 60s, right? When the Bay Area got too hot for them, they moved to Colorado, and they bought a big house in the suburbs. I forget the exact town.
Colorado Springs is the fucking.
I think you're right, actually.
It's the center of this all in Colorado.
I think you're correct. I don't know off the top of my head, but they moved to Colorado and they bought a suburban house with a closed garage door where they could bring in the trucks with their drug gear, close the garage door, and pretend that they're just a nice another little. And then they were cooking up a lot of the drugs that were being fed into the West Coast and the East Coast drug pipelines from a little suburban home in Colorado. Wow. And I think it's interesting because like Terence McKenna grew up in a little suburban home in Colorado.
That's right.
his mother worked
Just
for
picking up
Kaiser.
rocks with his brother
like-
out in the desert.
Yeah, it's weird how this all connects, which kind of goes back
Picking
to
up rocks.
He was he was a geologist in
Rocks.
You know, they were obsessed with.
I smoke rock.
He was always obsessed with discovering the smaller parts of things.
Well,
and
he
everything.
collected insects and butterflies and stuff. That's part of
That's
why
right.
he
There's
was-
a lot of rock smoking in Baltimore.
Yeah, my bad. Not rocks.
No.
Well, he did mention that a couple times, but yeah, insects
I
too.
think
He
he's
would
into the
study
rocks, too.
anatomy, and
I think he
yeah.
was into the rocks too.
he was geology and things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But
Anyway, so
yeah, dude,
yeah,
yeah.
there's a lot there. I don't know. I mean,
I think we've covered a ton of shit already, and we could keep going, but it's getting late over here.
yeah, it has been an hour and a half.
Well,
Oh.
hey, this is right in our wheelhouse. We could go longer. I mean,
Do you want to? How
definitely.
about we wrap it up? Is there anything? I know I've kind of been like rambling, and pardon.
No, we all ramble.
No,
That's like I
that's
said in
what we have
in
you on
the,
for.
Hell
Is there
yeah, man!
any-
It's just a conversation.
Yeah.
You know?
Are there anything that you guys were curious about that you want to just bounce off me real quick before we do close it out? Because I know y'all both have done a lot of research that touches on a lot of like Andy mentioned Aldous Huxley, and I know there's just a lot of other.
Dude, so
Andy
I mean,
has
yeah,
done a lot of research.
Shane is the subjective observer, and you know that's why you
Well,
come in
that's
with the
also
great
very important.
slams.
We
But
need a-
Aldous Huxley, that's a rabbit hole for sure. Yeah, I did mention him, and then I mentioned Bulletproof Publishers. But yeah, Aldous Huxley seems more and more complicit rather than some sort of warning, like Messiah, like telling us what's coming or something like that.
Yeah.
He finds himself in really interesting places, and I
Yeah.
don't want to speak incorrectly because I'm gonna fuck up a lot of the details that Dwayne has worked so deeply on. So I just direct the listeners to check out bulletproofpub.com and check
Word.
out all the articles, tons of articles, and it's basically like cracking open the entire 20th century and where
Yeah.
all this shit comes from, because the psychedelics are a massive part of it, and we've covered a lot of that tonight, and you've enlightened both of us on a number of parts of it that I've never even heard that fall in line with so much more, like
Yeah.
where it comes from in the early 20th century and the early beginnings of this degradation of Western society altogether. And for me, which it's not mentioned, Dwayne doesn't talk about this, but you know, my obsession with the ancient past and my, you know, obsession with Terrence McKenna 20 years ago, like his archaic revival seems to be coming to a head here.
Oh yeah.
You know, you could turn on Netflix, and again, there's truth mixed in with bullshit,
Yeah.
but every show is about the occult. So
Yeah,
whether you're a
totally.
conspiracy theorist that can go, oh, you see that shit? They're just putting it right in our faces. This is what they're doing. Or you're someone on the other side obsessed with psychedelics and are, yeah, maybe I will try witchcraft. I want to meet my spirit guides and all this kind of shit that they're. So again, that whole angle is bullshit on top of bullshit layered on top of a core truth about consciousness, who we really are, what these experiences really mean. And we'll have to have other conversations. I talk a lot about how folklore and mythology are part of this as well. And it's a partial cover up of a good portion of history, but I don't even think it was really covered up. It was just that our language has evolved and our perceptions have been managed to look at language and look at experiences in a very particular way.
Yeah.
You know, but that's a can of worms for another day.
Yeah.
Honestly, we've covered
yeah.
a lot here.
Well, maybe
But,
we can do that in some future talk, like you said.
Fuck yeah, man.
There's a lot to discuss there.
It's always good to meet like-minded people, you know, who can talk about topics that, you know, we're both familiar with, because Terrence.
No, I'm fucking paranoid. You guys are both fucking AI, fucking
You too,
lizard people.
dude.
You're
All
trying
three
to
of
trying to
us,
get
dude.
me.
All three of us, man. Like Shane, you could have said a whole lot more, you know.
I
But
want to
maybe
hear
that's
more
why
from
we need
Shane.
to,
Yeah.
we need to do a part two. You know,
Next conversation. let's
sorry.
do it. Shane. Yeah.
little tired.
Shane was vibing on that higher truth, that fucking we're all just consciousness, man.
I just like I don't
All these
know. I
wars
don't
are a
care about
beautiful
anybody's
painting.
names. Like I don't like. I like history. It's fun, but it's all
Just like,
just like
what's the
repeats.
message?
Once you like know like about Rome and I don't know I don't know, you just like learn basic history.
Yeah.
Like it literally all is just repeating.
Yeah.
And and then I learned about Box Saga through Andy, and it's like, oh wow, yeah, it's all kind of just the same shit, except for they got giant fuck piles to make
Dude,
one person.
fucking pagans, yeah, man.
And they suck on their own dicks. And not talking shit, bro. Wish I could suck my own dick, I guess.
Oh, dude, yeah, that's a whole can of worms that I could. Yeah,
you gotta listen to that shit, dude.
Oh my god. Yeah, that's why there's obelisks all over this fucking planet, because ancient pagans were just obsessed with their dicks, and the same reason why every military pendant, when every time you gain a rank, you got to fuck another dick on your above another one, creating the biggest dick you can on your shoulder. It's great.
I mean, the whole pagan connection, yeah, is a whole lot. We could unpack the whole like connection to the occult and what's going on there, like how this ties back to all these weird traditions and stuff.
Hell yeah, man. There's so much there. I could turn you on to so many authors. If you probably heard of some of them, I'm sure. But yeah, we'll have to exchange some notes, man, and just jam. But this was really fucking awesome. I got nothing off the top of my head to say. Okay. Shane, what you got anything before we wrap things up?
I could just fucking completely derail the whole thing and make it a whole another 2-hour conversation, but I think we're gonna save it for part 2.
Yeah, we'll have to do that.
Cool.
All right. Well, Vincent, tell the people on my end where to find you, brother.
Yeah, for sure. So you can find a lot of my work at highandmighty.substack.com, and that's high and mighty as in the words. And that's the name of my new book that's going to be out soon about how people in power use drugs. A lot of what we've been talking tonight about are things that I write about in the book. So if people dig what they've heard, go and check out my Substack. The paid subscribers will actually get a copy of the book. So if you want like an advance order and you just want to get a copy as soon as I'm done, that's an option. But yeah, I'm happy to come back, and there's a lot more to discuss here. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I'll shut up now, and we'll continue all this in part 2. I just want to say thank you to Andy and Shane for having me on the show, and thank you to all the listeners and viewers out there for for bearing along with us on this rabbit hole. This has been a very interesting conversation that I appreciate y'all both taking the time to have with me. So thanks again.
Oh, likewise, man.
Thanks for coming on. I'd love to have you on my show too. Check it out.
Yeah, I knew some, but I didn't know it all. Yeah, man, it was really great talking to you. I appreciate your work and all the shit you're uncovering and bringing more attention to. It's what I'm trying to do. It's what a lot of us are trying to do. So I think we're on the right side of history, but who fucking knows, right?
Who knows? It's hard to say.
Dude, that's what I'm always worried about. I'm like, fuck, like some of this, like I don't want anyone else to think they have solipsis, bro. Like,
well, yeah, I mean,
they already do. That's why they're like, oh, they hear these guys talking about it. They can relate. It's good. But anyway, we're gonna wrap it up.
Bring them out of it.
Go check out Vincent. Also on Twitter, right? I'll tag you with my shit.
Vincent with a V, and then my last name is Rado. Vincent Rado. So if you find me on Twitter, I am pretty active on there, and I do follow Fridays, and this is going to come out on a Friday. So if you want to find some more cool people to follow, come check out my Twitter page. And I got a whole lot of cool friends who also do this kind of research, and we all need to have more conversations. So yes, let's do it.
Exactly. Hell
Thank you both so much.
Likewise, man. Thank you very much.
Thank
you everybody for watching and listening. Have a great week. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Deep Share Podcast. If you want to hear more, then hit that subscribe button. Follow me on all the social places. And remember, think for yourself, but don't always believe what you think. Till next time.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, that's hysteria. Enough, I get the point.
You have meddled with the primal forces of nature. And you will atone.
What do we know? What do we know? If I know what we know, then I can tell you what we know, and if someone else knows, okay? I mean...